All right. So my topic is really not about the brain, although I would be very interesting to know how the brain reacts to news. The topic is rather about news data and how we can perhaps use machine learning and other techniques to make more sense of it. So I'll start with what's the pain in there. You might have noticed that we are really inundated by news. At the same time, it's really, we have a hard time essentially extracting useful information out of it. And one of the problems I find is the burstiness of news, that one day we focus on this particular topic and then it's completely forgotten the next day. So I don't know if you remember where we're going to die from H1N1. It's completely gone. So I think apparently we solved the problem completely. There won't be anything until next time there is another scare about this. And I can predict, and you probably agree with me, that same will happen with all the topics that seem so burning today. They will disappear and then reappear. And so our project here is to try to essentially calm the situation and give us a longer-term perspective on news. And I think it's a very important topic because news actually, they form and influence our brain. That they essentially, where did we learn about Gaddafi except in the news? Unless you're a scholar about Libyan things, you probably learned about that person in the news. So it's very important to see what is the news saying. Of course, there is a whole activity which is about, okay, now you see what they're saying, then maybe you can comment on it. This project is not so much about this as it is to foster that kind of critical attitude with the news. So 3 tasks can come to mind. So one example would be, what is the relative importance of topics with respect to other topics? Like for example, countries. Which countries are mentioned, which aren't? Once you focus on a particular topic, maybe nuclear energy or China, can you summarize what the news say about that topic? And finally, once you see a whole landscape of news, can you cluster? So essentially, it goes back to the same kind of algorithms we've seen with the brain research, where we look at graphs and try to cluster them. And we can cluster by source, geography, topic, and so on and so forth. So this here is very, although it uses machine learning in kind of a similar way, this is really not about search. I'm not interested in finding the article that mentions this particular topic at that particular time. I'm interested in the picture of the whole haystack and try to summarize it in an interpretable way. So there's this StatNews Project, and there's many people in there, including Binu from statistics, who is my co-PI. And we're trying to provide a service which essentially allows to do some simple queries. I will not say searches. And I will give you an example now of what the types of things that... okay. Hold on. So this is a website where you can register and you can say, you know, I'm interested in what say the Wall Street Journal says about China in those times, and I'm going to do a particular analysis which is co-occurrence. And co-occurrence is simply counting which words come together with China in any document unit, in this case just headlines. And I'll comment more later on this particular graph, but essentially we come with a list of words that form some kind of lexical image of the news. So you can think of these words as being like a signature of China in that particular topics, which is here Wall Street Journal. Now I need to find where my talk is. So let me now focus on the idea of imagining a term. So essentially we want to discover associations. So if you're interested in how, say, China is depicted in the New York Times, you might just want to discover what words or terms are associated with that particular topic. So there's, for example, here's a list, and I don't need to tell you which countries it refers to. That's what I was saying, that in fact the media influences us, because even if I didn't tell you what the topic was, you know I'm talking about Japan. Now, the project is about, given Japan as a query and a large collection of text documents, can I automatically generate these lists? And once I've generated, there's probably many methods to do that, can I validate the list? In other words, can I validate with human validation the algorithm that gives me such a list? Now, since you are able to reverse engineer these words into Japan, it seems like these particular words are a good choice. Maybe it's also easy because now we all know about these news. So the question is, is there a better choice? What is it we want? Well, we want a summary of the topic in the period under study. So this is one way, which is a traditional way. It comes back to the Middle Ages, where monks would go into the Bible and count the frequency of certain words. And they would use that to, I don't know what they would use that to. But content analysis has a long history. In fact, it's the bread and butter. It's the main method in many social sciences, including media analysis. That's how people say, you know, this topic is portrayed in this way or that way. There's a bias here and there. And in fact, if you read the news themselves, often you see statements like, the media portrays this and that, or comments about how the media itself or some other sources portray things. So this is the classical way it's done. Now there is another way, which is also centuries old, which is just to count. And co-occurrence means you're interested in Japan, look at all the paragraphs that contain that word, and look at the words that co-occur in that same paragraph, and then make a list. The list will be huge, but potentially you want to cut it down to 10 words. So that's a co-occurrence analysis. The main drawback with that is that it will pick up words. For example, if you want to differentiate the way Japan is treated in Washington Post versus how it's treated or portrayed in New York Times, then you'll find probably a lot of commonalities, common words that appear in both. And I'll give you an example of the shortcomings of co-occurrence. So one of the new things that we're proposing is to classify, is to view this as a machine learning problem, and I'll come back to it later. So for example, here's a simple example where, you know, I'm reader of the New York Times, and I know who writes in there. However, you might not. So here's a person who wants to know what these two editors, they're writing opinion pieces regularly, they have columns. What do they talk about? Maybe you don't know these people. How do they talk? What do they talk about? Well, in the particular period where this data rests on, it was just before the election. So both were talking about elections in the for president. Okay, so they talk about Obama, president, American, and so on. So there's only a few words that are different. There's a reference to the Middle East here with Roger Cohen, but you know, mostly I would say this is a nice list. It's perhaps accurate, but it doesn't help me distinguishing between two things. And machine learning has become very good at distinguishing between two things automatically using classification. That is, we look at the corpus written by one author, the corpus written by the other author, and we're trying to find features, words, that if we are presented with a new article, monitoring the appearance of those words would tell you which author generated the new unseen article. So that's the basis of classification. Sparse classification is a new kid on the block in machine learning, where on top of classification, you're not just interested in classifying. Like, for example, typically classification would say, here's this customer, here's the history of the customer, is he or she credit worthy? That's a classification problem. And you can be very good at it. But usually, classification algorithms employ all the features available. You know, in the case of credit risk analysis, you might employ, age, gender, location, and so on and so forth. But here, if we use this, we'd come up with very huge lists of words that each contribute a little bit to distinguishing this and that author. Instead, we want sparse. We want the result, the algorithm, to classify, to rest only on only a few words. So that's why we put in sparse here. And this becomes a much more complicated problem, but it has very efficient solutions. So when you apply this kind of new method to trying to understand what is the difference between these two authors, you get now a very different picture. And those words are not necessarily the most often used words for both authors. How are they generated? Is we take this author and we take all the other columnists and we ask which words in both corpus allow me to tell, well, if I see a new article and I see those words, then I say, that must be Nicholas Kristof. And you can see, indeed, it corresponds, if you're a reader of New York Times, you can see that these words from Nicholas Kristof reflect his interests in technology issues, Facebook, and also human rights, and so on. Sweatshops, he had a whole lot of pieces there. At that period, both authors were writing about the same thing, the presidential election. But this algorithm... How long, how many articles? 6 months, and so I don't remember how many columns. It's a rather small data set. It's an illustration here. And Roger Cohen has also very different things that correspond indeed to his interests. So both approaches, the classical co-occurrence and this new thing, offer complementary views. And my main message here is that it's now possible to automate the generation of such lists. So we've done this and for all the authors over a period of 1 year, and each time it sort of makes sense if you know these authors. Okay? So this is just an idea of two corpora trying to understand what is the difference. What are the words that make the difference? And you apply this like comparing two sources. You can compare same source over 2 different times. For example, you can analyze a topic. Give me a topic like China, a corpus like Wall Street Journal over the last 5 years. I can find you the words that characterize China over all the other words. Or I can simply classify China against all the other countries. So one of the goals in this is to be able to sort of put in perspective the news over a long range of time. So I want to show you some image of, it's in the works, so I'm not saying it's like so what is this? On top you have a few countries, and on the bottom, so time is going by. This is the last 3 months. And unfortunately, hold on, I must stop this because, where is it? Yeah. I'm going to make it run if I can. So essentially what we're trying to do is to be able to visualize, if I can make this run. For some reason it doesn't. Okay, so as time goes by, you have list of words that correspond to different countries, the occurrence of each country, and you can see here, if you look into the list, some topics appearing and disappearing out of the image of the country. Each term here, which you can't see, I'm sorry about that, but there is a list of words like Cuba, Chile, and I can even list Frankfurt and so on. These are not obtained by your run-of-the-mill just counting which words co-occur, but they involve elaborate machine learning to come out with words that are unique to the country at hand. So for example, for Portugal, you have Fitch, which is a rating agency which refers to the difficulties of Portugal as a country which is about to default or something like that. Another visualization involves, here I've selected words. This is just a selection. And I'm going to track them. So this is a very simple, not elaborate thing. Over the past few months, you see Egypt coming up, and then all these other topics are really not in view. But as the frequency increases, they near this, and look at the correlation between Libya and oil. Okay, so I'll tell you a little story. One of my students, actually the one who developed these visualizations, he had an internship with Deutsche Bank this summer. And Deutsche Bank purchases from Reuters the headlines that Reuters generates with the right to have them 1 minute before everybody else. They pay dearly for this. So the kind of correlation that we've seen between oil and Libya, they act on it. They actually invest on it. So this might be crazy, and it's not really what we are trying to do here, because we want to do long-term perspective. But what I'm trying to convey is that the news have a huge impact, and the news will have even more impact as we go, and the burstiness of the news will increase even more. So it becomes an urgent matter to be able to provide some kind of distance, a critical distance to the news. And I think our answer is to say, well, just visualize it over a long time and work on machine learning, use machine learning to display what are the big trends, the big effects. No, sorry. I did something wrong here. So this is another example where we take India and classify India against all the other BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, and Canada. And we do that by different sources. So we take The Guardian over the past year. So that's, in the end, we had a small database of 50,000 articles, including The Guardian, Australian, the Washington Post, and I'm forgetting the two others. And we're trying to understand how sources depict countries differentially. So The Guardian, The Guardian clearly has an emphasis on sports. India is big in sports, of course, and it does mention it. Whereas the Washington Post views India as a strategic player. Okay, maybe you know that. I did not. The point is that you can potentially, not now, but potentially we can arrive at these sorts of conclusions within seconds. It doesn't take time to get this. What the effort is to make the groundwork, make the system work so that it's at the fingertips of non-experts. So that's the goal. Here's another type of visualization, and I'll comment on it. But for now, let me just say what this is about. This is about Microsoft. And it points to the idea that you could use such things in branding or just trying to understand what is the brand of a particular activity. In this case, Microsoft. The big words that you see there are picked up by the algorithm. You see software, antitrust, Xbox, and then Windows, and then Apple, and then Europe. You know why Europe? Right. You have antitrust, and you have the competitors, Intuit, Apple. Essentially, if you read those words, it's the story of Microsoft. And it's ordered by order of appearance. In other words, what we've done, just look at the list for now. We've done is find words. Are they in the image? We use machine learning at each year to try to find a few words. And each year corresponds to a column. So this particular column says the words corp, quarter, net, company are the first to appear in the image. And these words here corresponds to 94. You see Rose, Gates, Intuit, Windows. 94. So you can see here the whole history of Microsoft. And of course you can say, well, I knew that. But now we can examine things I didn't know. Okay, Microsoft is well known. I just want to show you that such things recover things that are completely logical, that would probably, a non-expert would come up, if asked to come up with 30 names, 30 terms characterizing Microsoft, maybe those would be there. The fact that we have this staircase pattern here is we want to show the timeline, how this evolves over time. So this is how this plot is organized. But if you don't bother about this right-hand side, just look at the list. So China, you can see, for example, that the American press is very critical about China, according to this analysis. That, in fact, what is picked up, yes, it's trade, it's international and other economic things that portray the power of the economy of China. But most, you can see things that the US throws at China in terms of criticism. And that's the New York Times. I haven't shown it here, but if you do the Wall Street Journal, completely different image. The Wall Street Journal is not so much concerned about human rights, dissident, Taiwan, Dalai Lama, and all these topics. Cancer. You know, I thought that cancer would be reflected in terms of how prevalent a cancer is. That's not the case. Breast cancer is not the most prevalent cancer. You know what is the most prevalent? Huh? Skin? Prostate among males, like breast among females. And I don't think it's skin, it's lung cancer. But lung cancer, so here is what a social science person could do. I'm sorry?
It's the most fatal, but lung cancer is not the most prevalent cancer.
Ah, okay. Here's my confusion. So see, I need to engage with a social scientist to tell me that kind of thing. And also, is there an interpretation? Maybe the readership of the New York Times is more interested in breast cancer. But there's anecdotal evidence. Yes?
Lobbying on breast cancer.
I'm sorry?
Massive lobbying on breast cancer.
There's massive lobbying. I have a friend who works at UCSF. He tells me it's much harder to get funding for lung cancer than breast cancer. Part of the question is the image of lung cancer, which is typically associated with smokers, whereas in fact it's an environmental disease. So there's a whole lot of issues that are underneath this, and it's not my expertise to comment well on those issues, as you pointed out. But I think it's interesting to understand what the press is saying and We can read 50,000 articles a day, perhaps, but the machine can't count words, and this is faster. So for example, diabetes, there's two types of diabetes. One is this fancy, high-tech thing that biotechnology is going to solve, and victims are young kids. And then there's the big diabetes epidemics, who kills many people, and it's a very big problem in America and elsewhere. Guess which topic is most covered? Okay? So many people say this. They say the media portrays diabetes as such. This gives you a quantitative ground to make claims about the media. And this is not because I'm interested in customers, but just I want to point out one difficulty. If you do text processing, as I started doing, you hear that the practice, like even at Google and stuff like that, all the people who handle text, they tell you you should stem words, you should remove plurals, you should remove stop words, you should do this, massage the data in this and that way. However, when you're interested in images, things are not the same. Customer and customers, they're not the same concept. Of course, they're related, but they're not the same concept. A customer is an individual, and he's, grappling with customer service and stuff like that. Customers, that's the target of big corporations, right? So it's a totally different image. We're not talking about the same concept. So one application of this is very tentative for now, but that's one of our goals, is to allow people who are non-speakers of a certain language to still get some idea of what news sources from that country say. And the idea is this. I want to know what China says about Libya. And maybe you know. Maybe, I sound defensive because many people tell me, why do you bother about this? So I keep being defensive, but I shouldn't. So anyways, I'm interested in knowing what the Chinese government says, or Chinese government or Chinese press says about Libya. So there's one method. If I know Chinese, I'm in luck. If I don't, then I'm out of luck. There's another method, which is one of the main goals of natural language processing, which is, take all your data and translate it. And then, then read it. Okay? Well, first of all, it doesn't solve my problem because I still have to read thousands of articles. Okay, granted, they're now in English or some kind of English, but I have still to read them. And the third method is just apply this in Chinese language. This is not simple, but it can be done. So now you can apply these kind of classification techniques to come up with a short list of terms that depict Libya in the Chinese press. So essentially, we take thousands of articles about Libya versus all the other articles in that period, and we're trying to find the Chinese words, there's a whole issue there of segmentation, but try to find the Chinese terms that best depict Libya versus all the others. And then we come up with a few terms, and then we translate the terms. That's much simpler to translate 1 or 10 words than translate thousands of documents. And so essentially what you see here is, for example, humanitarianism. Okay, so if you discuss this topic and you are trying to understand what that means, well, it's not just viewed as a philosophical statement. This particular term refers to an attitude or a policy or some kind of stance from the West to engage with the world. Okay, so you can view this as a little bit of criticism. Otherwise, you can see that it's plainly neutral. It's very neutral. Okay. So I'll end now with some challenges. So our first challenge, which is not there, is that we need to get the damn data. And it seems easy, But in fact, it's not that easy. Why is it not that easy? We can scan data, news as they come in. But going back in time is really interesting. So we've done the effort to scan the whole New York Times since its inception. We have it in text now. But we'd like to have all the other sources. And unfortunately, the business model of the print media is not to distribute that kind of thing. Even though we would process it in such a way that it would be completely recognizable. In fact, that's our goal. We want to hide this mountain of information. So that's one challenge that I'm not mentioning here. The second challenge is, you see, if you start being interested in that topic, you realize that this topic of sparse classification is really at the core, as it is at the core of many other fields, like in biology. I use the same algorithms with my biology work than I use here. It's just exactly the same. So this points to a broader scheme of things, which is about interpretable statistics. You want to get a result, but not only you want to get it, but you want to know, for example, if you're doing gene analysis, genomics, you want to know what are the few genes that explain the variation. What are the few words that explain the variation? And so all these topics are exactly the same algorithmic topics. Also, because we have large databases, we need to do something about the size. So that's one of the interactions with the next talk. And also in social sciences, what do we do with it? Well, this is a chicken and egg problem, and here our approach is to say, we don't know how this can be used. We suspect this might be useful, so we're going to put it out as a service to social sciences so that they can start playing with it. This is like a microscope. I have no idea what is going to be discovered, but I think in this era of data, it's about time that machine learning and statistics and computer helps the journalist, the concerned citizen, to make sense of large amounts of data. That's it.
Thank you so much. So we have time for questions before we get to the next slide.
Yes.
Okay, so you talked about generating lists of words describing the same topic from different sources that focus on how the different groups of words differ. But I was wondering if you have a way of quantifying the degree of sameness between the two authors or two sources.
Okay, that's a very good question, and indeed, I haven't talked about it, but there's a way, very classical by the way, to sort of, for example, what we can do is put authors on a two-dimensional map with them being closest if they statistically are linked through their writings. And there's a host of different ways. Some of them involve graphs, others involve principal component analysis, and so on. So, yeah, it's a very important topic.
Thanks. So I found that a very interesting talk because I'm a journalist who's interested in machine learning and writes about it a little bit. I guess my thought on it is, are you working with any people, and it's part of validation, but it's maybe, well, it's utility, I guess. So are you working with people who do have to, for their jobs, summarize vast amounts of this sort of information? So I'm thinking about two types of people, maybe people like CIA analysts. They need to do this type of stuff. And I'm thinking about people who perhaps be more applicable to monitoring the scientific literature than the news, knowing the biases the news puts on it. But people who have to invest in tech stocks or biotech in particular, they need to be on top of the biomedical literature and be able to spot trends emerging out of it, as indeed do I for my job. Now, if I could see that that was doing things that are telling them things they don't already know, then I'm really convinced of the utility of it. From what I've seen so far, I'm not convinced that it's not useful. It's just, I found myself the things I knew about. It was either, yeah, I know that already, like I know The Guardian's going to write about cricket when it comes to India, being British. And when it came to the diabetes one, and cancer, which I also know something about, I felt that what was going on there is actually the real meaning in that. And as you pointed out, diabetes is two completely different things. And I'm not quite sure, well, I knew that already. I'm not quite sure that word list told me that. And I'm not sure it was like it was too fragmentary. It was kind of falling apart because it was lumping concepts that were actually separate. So I'm kind of interested in, well, back to my first question, is whether you're working with people for whom this will be a really potentially valuable professional tool, and whether they're getting information from it that they can't get otherwise.
All right. Yes, I mean, you made several points that are quite important here. So to address your main question, I would say that we're in the process of working with social scientists, the media analysts that are interested in how topic X is portrayed. So we're doing these case studies. One example, for example, in collaboration with University of Twente in Holland, the point was to analyze how politicians react to a newcomer on the scene who's this very right-wing politician, and they want to know how the different other politicians react to them. And most of this work is about, as you pointed out, recovering things they already knew. I didn't know that politician X in Holland was sympathetic in his writings. You know, I mean, that's information that's new to me, but they recover. I think there's a whole groundwork of validations on things that are, known to the experts, and automatically recovering things this way. And then when it comes to learning new things, teaching the experts new things, I have my doubts. I think the experts will know the important things already. And I don't think that this is a tool that really will help the expert that is super informed either on diabetes or what's going on in Afghanistan to get a sense, because this is a raw thing. It's a really raw thing. The thing is, it gives you a whole summary over a large database. So it's more like for an ordinary user who doesn't know about this. I mean, for example, I didn't know that The Guardian was talking about sports when talking about India. Now then, the last question you asked is, how could it be useful, really? This I don't know yet. So.
Thank you so much. I think we should just move on. So the next